While we often tend to dismiss pop culture as little more than a distraction from the more serious aspects of our adult lives, the truth is, the media that we consume when we're looking to shut our brains off is a lot more important than we tend to think. In our modern digital world, popular culture like movies, TV, internet memes, social media trends, and the like are much more than a distraction. They actively shape our perceptions of the world out beyond the horizon. But while this is true for just about every aspect of our modern world, I might argue that it's maybe most pronounced when it comes to military technology. Less than 1% of the US population serves in the military at any given time, and that means that for the vast majority of those watching movies full of fighter jets, missiles, bombs, and the like, well, those movies are the closest these people will ever get to the defensive hardware featured on screen. And believe it or not, that does have an appreciable effect on how we, as a people, perceive the military, and maybe more specifically, its capabilities. So let's talk about some of the best movies featuring military hardware and the lies they've taught us about modern defense technology. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power.
Fox 1.
The United States is continuing to mass air power assets in and around the Middle East as tensions continue to boil with Iran, including B-2 Spirits positioned in Diego Garcia, more F-35s being shifted to Jordan, and a second carrier strike group deployed to the region. Right now, this all seems like political theater aimed at Iran, but just in case this theater does turn kinetic, I've been staying on top of it thanks to Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by news outlets all around the world and places them all into a single easy-to-read feed that helps me not just stay on top of what's going on, but to see right through some common forms of media bias. Right here on Ground News, I can see that 80 outlets have already covered this story, including at least 17 left-leaning ones and 13 right-leaning ones. So far, some left-leaning outlets have really played up the possibility of war with Iran, with headlines like record-breaking US deployment in Middle East amid Trump's nuclear ultimatum for Iran. Whereas right-leaning outlets have largely been more reserved in their headlines. Like this one, satellite images show US bombers sending a message to Iran. And Ground News also shows you vital information about each outlet along with the headlines, like their political bias, their factuality rating, corporate ownership, or government affiliations. And I love the Ground News blind spot feature that shows me stories that are getting lots of attention in one political sphere, but not in the other. It helps me make sure I'm keeping my media diet balanced. Ground News is a big part of my research and my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's, or just follow that link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use every day. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. If there's one constant I've come across in my years studying military aviation, it's that it is an inherently dangerous enterprise. Now, some of you likely already know that I worked in racing, both before and after my time in the Marine Corps. In fact, my brother still works in racing, and you might have even seen him on TV driving the safety car in the 12 Hours of Sebring just a few weeks ago. And I bring this up now because there are some distinct parallels between military aviation and auto racing. Fighter aircraft, like race cars, aren't designed to go get groceries. They aren't built for a Sunday cruise, and they aren't operated like commuter vehicles. You could drive your Audi or Honda for years without ever pushing it past its red line, without ever hearing your tires squeal, and without ever facing the distinct possibility of a real and violent end brought about by your own failure to subdue your baser instincts and hold a line that feels like it's going to rip your body in half. That is the very nature of racing. And in a lot of ways, that's the nature of military aviation too. We task combat pilots with doing the seemingly impossible, wrestling physics into submission by screaming across the sky so fast that the aircraft can reach you before the sound of its own engines. Pilots train relentlessly to flex the muscles in their lower body so tightly that they can literally squeeze the blood up out of their legs and back up toward their brain, beating back inertia just long enough to keep their eyes open and their mission on track, as telephone pole-sized interceptors close with them at supersonic speeds, and enemy fighters jockey for better firing positions. But while a race car driver can place nearly all of their focus on the road ahead of them, fighter pilots have to split their attention between countless sensors and displays, navigating through complex battlefield environments toward invisible waypoints deep inside enemy territory. For these pilots, it isn't enough to fly in and back out across the finish line. They have to deliver their ordnance with pinpoint accuracy, juggling weapon guidance systems, aircraft positioning, radio communications, and constant vigilance for inbound surface-to-air missiles. For pilots flying the suppression and destruction of enemy air defenses, something the Air Force often calls the Wild Weasel mission, their job is the closest thing to being a Wild West gunfighter you're likely to find in the modern era. These aviators aren't trying to avoid being shot down. They fly their jets straight at advanced surface-to-air missile systems, using themselves and their wingmen as bait, waiting for enemy radar to come online and target them so they can launch radar-hunting anti-radiation missiles back at those arrays. These pilots stare death in the face for a living, but because of their extreme professionalism, their constant training, and honestly, their nerves of steel, videos of these real engagements captured from inside the cockpit often seem downright mundane. And maybe it's because of that Hollywood movies tend to get military aviation so wrong, often inventing threats that don't exist, dramatically overstating the capabilities of adversary systems, and depicting just about every pilot as a loose cannon just a few days from retirement. The real drama of military aviation just isn't easy to convey on screen, so instead, we get caricatures of it. So let's highlight some of the stuff these movies get so wrong, and talk about why real life is actually a lot more interesting. And let's start with the movie that shaped my childhood. And if you watch this channel, it may have shaped yours too, Top Gun. Now, I've written and talked about Top Gun quite a bit over the years, and I am on record as saying that Maverick is not the hero of the original movie, but was actually the villain. You see, the real hero of Top Gun was Iceman, and that's because actual combat aviators just can't afford to be Mavericks. In this movie, Pete Maverick Mitchell and his radar intercept officer, Nick Goose Bradshaw, participate in what we now call the Navy Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor Program, but all of us know it better as Top Gun. And we, as the audience, follow him through his very real struggle with his mental health as he competes for the top spot in the course. Now, to the uninitiated, Maverick comes off as cool, capable, and pretty cocky, and you might be forgiven for thinking that it's that cockiness that makes the other pilots, like Tom Iceman Kazansky, not like him. But it's not Maverick's confidence that makes him a bad teammate, it's his reckless and selfish behavior. Now, this much was spelled out directly when Maverick asks Iceman what his problem is, and Iceman responds, "You are everyone's problem. That's because every time you go up in the air, you're unsafe." Later, he explains it again, telling Maverick, "It's not your flying, it's your attitude. The enemy's dangerous, but right now you're worse." And of course, it was Maverick's complete unwillingness to back off and potentially let Iceman take the trophy that created the dangerous set of circumstances that saw Goose die. Now, I know Ward Carroll and I disagree on that. I love Ward and we've discussed it, but we'll just have to agree to disagree. But by now you might be saying, "But Alex, that's Maverick's character arc. By the end of the movie, he becomes a good wingman and he saves the day." But did he really? Maverick started that engagement by deserting his wingman to fly off into the distance and have a full-blown anxiety attack. Now, I am not judging anyone for having anxiety, but if you've shown to have a track record of these sorts of attacks in the middle of complex air combat operations, you shouldn't be in the cockpit. Of course, it does all work out in the end for Mitchell. And that brings us to our second entry, pulled straight from the sequel, Top Gun Maverick. Now, I love Top Gun Maverick. It's one of my favorite movies of the past 10 years, and it is a true successor to my beloved Top Gun. But just like the first one, Top Gun 2 takes a lot of liberties with the realities of naval aviation, and yada yada yadas over some pretty big plot holes, like saying they couldn't use F-35s for their mission because of GPS jamming? Now, do I mind how silly it is that there would be a fully loaded F-14 sitting around for Maverick to jump into? Nope. Does it bother me that Maverick survived the Dark Star breaking apart at better than Mach 10? Nope. Could I watch the F-14 versus Su-57 fight every day for the rest of my life without ever getting bored of it? Yeah, absolutely. But this movie is still guilty of one of the most common things war movies get wrong about military aviation. It pretends other branches of service don't exist. The plot of Top Gun Maverick centers around the need to destroy an unsanctioned uranium enrichment plant deep inside an unnamed nation that is, well, obviously Iran. Somehow, in this universe, Iran is not only still operating American-supplied F-14s, which they are, but are also operating Russian-sourced Su-57s, which, like the nation flying them, are never actually identified by name. Now, in order to accomplish their mission, a group of Top Gun graduates flying their Super Hornets need to fly those jets to their structural limits and deliver their bunker-busting bombs while avoiding what seems to be a practically limitless supply of surface-to-air missile sites. Now, the movie starts this operation by hitting the enemy airstrip with Tomahawk cruise missiles, which makes a ton of sense, but it doesn't make nearly as much sense that they didn't also target those SAM sites with more Tomahawks. But even that wouldn't be necessary if the Navy just picked up the phone and made a call to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, home to America's fleet of B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. Now, these bombers could fly high over the canyon those Super Hornets had to zoom through without much concern for those dated Iranian SAM sites down below. And once over the target zone, the B-2 would employ its own laser-guided bombs to take out that enrichment plant, a lot like the Super Hornets did, except the B-2 pilots could do it in between sips of their coffee. Now, having the Navy do the job with Super Hornets is sort of like America deciding to fly this mission with both wings tied behind its back, but I will admit that it made for a much more entertaining movie. And while we're on the topic of surface-to-air missiles, let's jump all the way back to 2001's Behind Enemy Lines for some of the most egregious SAM scenes in all of film history. This movie also features U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornets, jets that were pretty brand new at the time of this movie. Owen Wilson's Lieutenant Chris Burnett spots Serbs burying massacred civilians in mass graves during a reconnaissance flight and is immediately targeted by what sure looks to me to be an SA-13, which is a Soviet-era short-range surface-to-air missile system. Now, these air defense systems were designed to launch interceptors like the Soviet 9M37, which has a max speed of right around Mach 2 and a maximum engagement range of around 5 kilometers or a bit more than 3 miles. Powered by a solid-fuel rocket motor, these weapons achieve their full speed nearly instantly, and they're known to burn through all of their onboard propellant, or fuel, in less than 5 seconds. Now that's pretty standard for short-range interceptors like these, whereas much longer-ranged surface-to-air missiles that can reach targets as far out as 100 or so miles, like America's PAC-2, well, they might burn for as long as 12 or even 15 seconds. But the interceptors shown in Behind Enemy Lines must have been packing a whole lot more fuel than that. If you start your stopwatch when the first missile is fired, you'll be at 39 seconds before Owen Wilson decides to deploy chaff and flares. The missile will have been flying in the air for a solid 1 minute and 37 seconds before he even decides to dump his drop tanks, and at 1 minute and 50 seconds before the first missile, with its engine still burning, flies into a mountain, just barely missing the jet. A second missile, launched at the 56-second mark, ultimately chases the jet down and destroys it almost a full 2 minutes after launch. Now, I'm not trying to suck all the fun out of these kinds of movies, but it is hard to argue that that isn't an absolutely wild exaggeration. To show these surface-to-air missiles zooming back and forth at what is clearly subsonic speeds, chasing a fighter jet for literally minutes on end. But what's worse is that you don't need to exaggerate like that to make this sort of scene truly heart-stopping. And for proof, we need look no further than the Package Q airstrike from Desert Storm, in which Major Emmett Tulia managed to dodge an astonishing 6 straight surface-to-air missiles, all with malfunctioning flares and chaff in his F-16. Now, this insane feat of flying took about as long as the scene in Behind Enemy Lines, with Tulia first calling out over the radio that he was defending against an inbound SA-2, followed by 3 straight minutes of Tulia managing to shake one missile just in time for the next to be launched his way. Now, the cockpit footage from Tulia's incredible flight is admittedly not as dynamic as the special effects in Behind Enemy Lines, but if you ask me, it is a whole lot more impressive. Of course, war movies aren't the only films that love to feature fighter jets doing fighter jet stuff, and that brings me to the most frustrating depictions of tactical aircraft in film: kaiju movies. Whether we're talking about Pacific Rim or Godzilla or any of the other giant monsters that Hollywood loves to pit against America's latest and greatest military hardware, seemingly every one of these monster movies always includes a scene with advanced 5th-generation fighters like the F-22 and F-35 flying straight at these monsters at low altitude to engage them at close range with their 20mm cannons. Now, from a filmmaking standpoint, we could probably call this an extension of what some have taken to calling the Worf effect. Now, this trope was born out of Star Trek The Next Generation, which featured a powerful Klingon warrior named, of course, Worf. Now, Klingons are a warrior race, and the show presents Worf as though he's even more capable in a fight than most of his own kind. So every time the show's writers wanted to depict a new villain as really tough and scary, well, they'd have them beat Worf down to show it. And as a result, it started to seem like this super tough Klingon warrior never actually won any fights. Directors know that people are broadly aware of how incredibly powerful and capable advanced fighter jets can be, so they show their monsters wiping the floor with them as a quick and easy way to show us, the viewer, just how serious the situation is. But in reality, none of these monsters would ever even see the jets they were swinging at. If the US military really had its heart set on engaging the world's kaiju with fighter aircraft, they'd be engaging from miles away at worst, and dozens of miles away at best. Weapons like the AGM-158 JASSM and the newer JASSM-ER could close with Godzilla's eyeball from 230 or even 575 miles away, respectively, delivering a 1,000-pound, penetrating, high-explosive warhead to the softest bits of that giant lizard. Now, these warheads are designed to blast through as much as 6 feet of steel-reinforced concrete before they detonate, and it seems pretty unlikely that a kaiju's cornea is a lot tougher than that. If Uncle Sam was running low on standoff munitions, well, then these aircraft could turn to glide bombs, like the 2,000-pound GBU-31 JDAM-ER, which can be dropped from as far as 45 miles away to glide silently into their targets with an extreme degree of precision. King Kong probably wouldn't even see these tiny specks in the sky coming. That is, until they detonated in his inner ear. If America ran out of glide bombs, well, a standard JDAM without those glide wings could do the same from as far as 15 miles out. Again, well outside the reach of any monster's giant paws. There's just genuinely no good reason to fly an aircraft anywhere near a giant monster in a fight. And if you really wanted to shorten up these movies, well, you could end them in the same way you could have ended Top Gun Maverick 10 minutes in, by using a single B-2 Spirit. America's stealth bomber is the only aircraft on the planet that's rated to carry and deploy the largest, deepest penetrating bunker-busting bomb that this world has ever seen. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator. Or, as I've taken to calling it, the Kaiju Killer. This bomb weighs in at an astonishing 30,000 pounds, much of which is the super-hardened tungsten and steel exterior casing, with a tungsten carbide nose cone designed specifically to rip through dirt, rock, and even steel-reinforced concrete like butter. This weapon was rated to penetrate through 200 feet of reinforced concrete before it was upgraded in recent years, and today, its maximum penetration capabilities remain classified. But once it does burrow its way deep into the recesses of Godzilla's cerebellum, it would detonate its 6,000 pounds of propellant-like plastic-bonded explosives developed specifically to maximize its blast energy output. Now, for reference, that's roughly similar to having 300 Hellfire missiles detonate inside your subterranean bunker, or your monster sinus cavity. And I guess admittedly that would make for a pretty short movie, but it would be more realistic anyway. And with that ends this sort of fun episode of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And in fact, let me know what movie-based lies about military aviation I missed. Maybe I'll make another list and I'll include your suggestions in the next one. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.
You can be my wingman anytime.
You can be mine.